What if the next global superpower isn't who you think? While all eyes are on the usual economic giants, a quiet but powerful boom has been building. A new force is emerging, with a projected GDP of nearly $3 trillion. But will Africa's rise reshape the world, or will old challenges stop it in its tracks? The reality might not be what you expect. For decades, the story of Africa was often one of struggle, usually written by outsiders and focused on poverty and conflict. It was a narrative of a continent rich in resources but held back, its immense potential always just out of reach. This perception wasn't wrong, it was rooted in real, difficult history and ongoing challenges that we can't and shouldn't ignore. But what if that story, the one we're all so familiar with, is dangerously out of date? What if, while the world was looking elsewhere, the foundations for a new global powerhouse were being quietly laid? This isn't about blind optimism, it's about following the data. It's a story of huge demographic shifts, technological leaps, and a new geopolitical landscape that is putting the continent in the driver's seat of its own destiny. We're going to look at the numbers, the trends, and what the experts are saying to understand both sides of this epic transformation. We will confront the monumental challenges head-on, the crushing debt, political fragility, and vast infrastructure gaps. And then we will weigh them against the equally monumental opportunities, the economic explosion, the demographic dividend, and the rise of a united African market. The question is no longer if Africa will rise. The question is how high, how fast, and will it be enough to redefine the global balance of power? Our journey to answer that starts now. Section 1, The Weight of History, Acknowledging the Hurdles. Before we talk about Africa as a future superpower, we have to be brutally honest about what's holding it back. To ignore the challenges would be to paint a fantasy, and the reality is far more complex and, frankly, more interesting. The rising Africa narrative is powerful, but it's being built on ground that is, in many places, still shaky. Let's start with the number that keeps finance ministers across the continent awake at night: debt. Projections show Africa's total external debt could surpass a staggering $1.3 trillion by 2025. This isn't just a number on a spreadsheet, it's a crushing weight on development. According to one report from 2025, in 25 African nations, for every $5 of government revenue, $1 immediately goes out the door to service old loans. Think about what that means. It's money that can't build hospitals, pave roads, or equip schools. For some countries, it's even worse. More than 20 nations are currently spending more on debt payments than on their entire healthcare budgets. 6 are spending more on debt than on education. It's a vicious cycle where paying for the past prevents you from building the future. And this isn't just about poor management. It's a consequence of a global financial system that often lends at higher rates to African nations, combined with shocks like the pandemic that have squeezed national incomes. In early 2025, public debt is expected to be around 64% of the continent's entire GDP, straining any ability to invest. Even the biggest economies aren't immune. South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria alone hold over a third of the continent's total external debt. Then there's the persistent shadow of political instability and conflict. While many parts of Africa are peaceful and democratic, you can't discuss the continent's future without addressing the hotspots that threaten to destabilize entire regions. The Sahel in particular has become an epicenter of turmoil. Countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are not just battling terrorist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They're also dealing with the fallout from military coups that have torn their political systems apart. This chaos doesn't respect borders. It creates a domino effect. It sparks massive humanitarian crises, with nearly 28.7 million people across the Sahel needing life-saving aid in 2025. It forces millions to flee, putting immense pressure on neighboring countries. Over 110,000 refugees have fled to coastal West African states, threatening the stability of what were, until now, relatively secure democracies. This forces a terrible choice on governments: spend your limited budget on soldiers and security, or on development. Too often, there isn't enough for both. The rise of the Alliance of Sahel states and their exit from the regional bloc ECOWAS points to a political splintering that makes it even harder to tackle these shared threats together. Finally, there's the foundational problem that affects everything else: infrastructure. You can't build a 21st century superpower on 20th or even 19th century foundations. The gaps are huge. Over 600 million people on the continent still don't have electricity. This isn't a minor inconvenience, it's a fundamental barrier to progress. It means kids can't study after dark, businesses can't run efficiently, and hospitals can't guarantee power for life-saving equipment. Here's the paradox. Africa holds an incredible 60% of the world's solar potential, yet it attracts less than 3% of global energy financing. It's a story of immense potential and profound neglect. To meet its goals, Africa needs to double or even triple its annual additions of energy capacity. The same story holds true for transportation and digital infrastructure. While mobile phones have been a revolution, Africa still accounts for less than 1% of the world's data center capacity. This digital divide threatens to lock the continent out of the AI revolution and the global digital economy. So the headwinds are fierce: crushing debt, deep-seated instability, and a massive infrastructure deficit. Based on this, it would be easy to write off the idea of an African superpower. If you appreciate this honest look at the complex reality shaping our world, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. But writing off Africa would mean you're only looking at one side of the balance sheet, and the other side is where the story gets truly explosive. Section 2. The reality, the trillion-dollar economic engine. Now let's pivot, because despite those very real challenges, something extraordinary is happening. An economic engine is revving up with a power that's starting to turn heads globally. This is the reality of Africa's trillion-dollar boom. Let's start with the headline number. Africa's combined GDP is on track for $2.8 trillion with growth forecast to hit 3.9% in 2025 and is projected to reach 4% in 2026. To be clear, this growth rate is set to outpace the global average, trailing only emerging Asia. This isn't a fluke. It's a sign of resilience built through tough reforms and better economic management over the past decade. But a continental average hides the real story. The true energy is at the national level, where countries are hitting breakout speed. In 2025, an incredible 21 African countries are expected to see their economies grow by more than 5%. Let that sink in. At a time of global uncertainty, nearly 24 countries are expanding at a rate most developed nations can only dream of. And some are moving even faster. A handful of nations like Ethiopia, Niger, Rwanda, and Senegal are projected to grow by over 7%. That isn't just a number, it's widely seen as the magic threshold for serious poverty reduction. We see Senegal with a projected 9.3% growth using its new oil and gas industry to fuel development. We see Ethiopia and Rwanda both projected at 6.5%, driving growth through a mix of agriculture, infrastructure investment, and a strategic push into services. So where is this growth coming from? For a long time, Africa's economy was all about extraction: oil from Nigeria, copper from Zambia, cobalt from the DRC. Natural resources are still incredibly important. Africa holds 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves, after all. But the story's getting much more interesting and diverse. The real game changer, the one that could redefine Africa's place in the world, is energy, but not the old kind. Africa is, without exaggeration, a potential renewable energy superpower. The continent has the world's largest untapped resources of solar, wind, and geothermal power. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has pointed out, this isn't just about powering Africa, it's about powering the world. By tapping into this, Africa could dramatically lower global energy costs and speed up the green transition for everyone. The scale is hard to comprehend. The continent holds 60% of the globe's total solar potential. Projects like Morocco's Noor Ouarzazate solar complex, one of the world's largest, or Kenya's Lake Turkana wind farm that already generates 17% of the country's electricity, are just the beginning. Egypt is building the massive 1.8 gigawatt Benban solar park. The African Development Bank's Desert to Power initiative aims to build 10 gigawatts of solar capacity across the Sahel, bringing electricity to 250 million people. This isn't just about electricity, it's about industrialization. Between 2022 and 2024, Africa imported over $12 billion worth of solar panels, batteries, and EVs. The next logical step is to start making these things at home. The market for solar panels in Africa between 2025 and 2030 is estimated to be a $27 billion opportunity. Capturing even a piece of that could create hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs. Alongside energy, the digital economy is another explosive frontier. That data center gap we mentioned, it's not just a challenge, it's a massive investment opportunity. Some experts predict that AI could add as much as $1.5 trillion to Africa's economy by 2030, changing everything from farming to healthcare to banking and government. And we can't forget traditional sectors. Agriculture is modernizing with new technology and climate-friendly techniques. Manufacturing is growing, fed by an expanding consumer market right at home. What all this points to is a structural shift. The continent is starting to move from being just an exporter of raw materials to a creator of finished products and services. The boom isn't just about getting bigger, it's about getting more complex and more resilient. And that's what gives the superpower question its real weight. Because a superpower needs more than just resources. It needs a sophisticated, dynamic economy. The foundations of that economy are being built right now. Section 3. The human element, Africa's demographic dividend. An economy, no matter how dynamic, is nothing without its people. And this is arguably Africa's greatest and most misunderstood asset. The continent's most powerful resource isn't its minerals or its solar potential. It's the energy, creativity, and ambition of its youth. The numbers are so staggering they're hard to wrap your head around. Africa is the world's youngest continent with a median age of just under 20. Think about
that. Half the population was born in this century. While Europe and parts of Asia are dealing with aging populations and shrinking workforces, Africa is on the verge of the largest youth boom in human history. Let's look at the projections. Africa's population, which crossed 1.5 billion in 2024, is on track to hit 2.5 billion by 2050. By then, more than 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African. Between now and 2050, 5 of the 8 countries that will account for over half of all global population growth are in Africa: Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Tanzania. This isn't just about total population, it's about the workforce. Africa's working-age population is set to grow by about 740 million people by 2050. By that year, it will make up over a quarter of the entire global workforce. This is what economists call the demographic dividend. It's a unique window in a country's history when you have a huge number of working-age people and a smaller proportion of dependents. This surge in human capital can unleash a wave of productivity and growth. More workers mean more production. More earners mean a larger consumer market, which attracts more investment. Some estimates suggest that if this dividend is harnessed effectively, it could add over $500 billion to the global economy every year by 2030. We're talking about a generation that is more educated, more connected, and more ambitious than any before it. They are digital natives who have skipped old development paths. They didn't need to wait for landlines, they are connected by mobile phones. They don't need brick-and-mortar banks. They are driving a global revolution in mobile money. This generation is not waiting for permission to innovate. However, a dividend isn't a guarantee. It's an opportunity and one that can be missed. This is the other side of the demographic coin, the challenge that keeps African leaders up at night. A massive youth population without jobs or hope isn't a dividend, it's a demographic time bomb. The task is huge. Every year, up to 12 million young Africans enter the job market. But right now, only about 3 million new formal jobs are created annually. Closing that gap is the single most important challenge the continent faces. It demands a massive investment in people, starting with education. Enrollment rates have improved, but now the focus has to be on quality. Education systems need to teach the skills of the 21st century: critical thinking, digital literacy, and the technical know-how for the green and digital economies. Advancing women's education is especially powerful, as it both boosts economic productivity and helps manage population growth. It also means creating an environment where businesses can hire. This means fixing the infrastructure deficit, supporting entrepreneurs, and making life easier for small and medium-sized businesses, the real engines of job creation. The potential is there. If the continent can create the right conditions, this demographic wave could lift millions out of poverty and power its rise for decades. But if it fails, the social and political consequences could be severe. The path to becoming a superpower, therefore, runs directly through Africa's schools, universities, and startup hubs. The future will be built not just with concrete, but with the skills and dreams of hundreds of millions of young people. The stakes couldn't be higher. Section 4. The New Scramble, Geopolitics and Agency. For over a century, Africa was treated as an object in world politics, a map to be carved up, a territory to be controlled, a source of resources to be taken. Today, that dynamic is flipping. The continent is no longer just a chessboard for great powers. It's becoming a player in its own right, with its own agenda and a growing ability to set the rules of the game. This shift is happening on 2 fronts: internally with the rise of regional powers, and externally as a new, more complex scramble for Africa unfolds, one where Africa holds more cards than ever before. First, let's look at the internal balance of power. The continent isn't a monolith, it's 54 diverse nations with a handful of states forming its economic and military core. The so-called Big Five, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, and Ethiopia, account for about 60% of the continent's entire economy. These are the regional anchors whose stability and growth ripple across their neighborhoods. But their futures are not all the same. Projections suggest that over the next 25 years, Nigeria and Ethiopia are set for the most significant growth and influence. Nigeria, with its huge population and economy, could hold nearly a fifth of Africa's total power by 2040. In contrast, established powers like Egypt and South Africa might see their relative influence plateau or even decline. This shifting internal dynamic will shape African politics, creating new centers of gravity and potential new rivalries. There's also a difference in the type of power. Egypt and Algeria have formidable militaries, but it's South Africa that often punches above its weight diplomatically, thanks to its deep alliances and leadership in global forums. But the biggest change is how Africa engages with the rest of the world. The old post-colonial relationships with Europe and the US are no longer the only game in town. A multipolar world has created a marketplace of partners, and African nations are becoming very savvy shoppers. The most significant new player is, of course, China. For 16 straight years, China has been Africa's single largest trading partner. In 2024, bilateral trade hit a record $295.6 billion. Chinese investment has built roads, railways, and power plants at a scale and speed that Western partners have struggled to match. However, the relationship is complicated. Concerns about debt are real. Massive loans for infrastructure have left some nations heavily indebted to China. There's also a big trade imbalance. Africa mainly sends raw materials to China while importing finished goods. In the first 8 months of 2025, Africa's trade deficit with China grew to nearly $60 billion, highlighting this structural gap. While China has made some moves to address this, like offering tariff-free access for some products, the core issue remains a point of friction. As China's influence grew, the United States' position has been challenged. For 25 years, the cornerstone of U.S.-Africa trade was the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, which gave thousands of African products duty-free access to the U.S. market. But then, in a move that sent shockwaves across the continent, the program was left to expire at the end of September 2025. After Congress failed to renew it, a quarter-century of trade policy simply vanished. Since April 2025, average U.S. tariffs on goods that were once eligible have shot up from less than 0.5% to around 10%, with some sectors facing tariffs as high as 15 to 20%. This not only threatens jobs in industries like apparel in Lesotho and Kenya, but also sends a powerful message that the U.S. may no longer be a reliable long-term partner. This has created an opening for other powers. Russia has expanded its footprint, especially in the Sahel, often trading security support for access to natural resources. Europe is trying to re-engage, talking about a partnership of equals, and other players, from Japan and India to Turkey and the Gulf states, are all deepening their ties. The result of this crowded field is leverage. African leaders are no longer forced to accept terms from a single dominant partner. They can weigh competing offers, play rival interests against each other, and choose deals that best serve their own interests. This growing agency is a core part of Africa's superpower potential. It's a move from being a pawn in a global game to becoming a strategic player. The new scramble is real, but this time, Africa is helping to write the rules. This geopolitical shift is fascinating, and we're curious to know what you want us to cover next. Let us know in the comments below what topics you'd like to see us break down in a future video. Section 5. The Blueprint for a Superpower: Integration and Institutions. A collection of fast-growing economies and a young population are key ingredients for a superpower, but they're not enough. To turn that potential into real influence, you need a unifying vision and the institutions to make it happen. For Africa, that blueprint is built around one massive idea: integration. For decades, one of the biggest brakes on Africa's development has been its own borders. A legacy of colonialism, these artificial lines created a fragmented continent of 54 small, inefficient markets. It has often been easier for a company in Nigeria to trade with China than with its neighbor Ghana. This has held back industrialization and made the continent dependent on outside partners. But that is starting to change thanks to what might be the most ambitious economic project on the planet, the African Continental Free Trade Area, or the AfCFTA. Launched in 2021, the AfCFTA aims to create the world's largest free trade zone by population, connecting 1.3 billion people. The goal is revolutionary, to systematically tear down the barriers to trade within Africa. This means cutting tariffs, aligning regulations, and simplifying customs. If it works, the impact could be huge. The UN projects that the AfCFTA could boost intra-African trade by over 45% and increase the continent's income by $450 billion by 2035. This isn't just about moving goods, it's about re-engineering Africa's entire economic model. By creating a huge, unified domestic market, the AfCFTA gives companies a reason to manufacture locally. A car factory in South Africa suddenly has a tariff-free market stretching from Cairo to Cape Town. A pharmaceutical company in Kenya can serve over 1 billion people. This is the scale that attracts big investment and allows for the creation of regional value chains. For example, using Congolese cobalt, Zambian copper, and Nigerian manufacturing to build electric vehicle batteries right there on the continent. The AfCFTA is more than an economic treaty. It's a declaration of economic independence. It's a strategic move to rely less on volatile global commodity prices and unpredictable foreign partners. By strengthening internal trade, Africa builds a buffer against outside shocks, whether it's a trade war or another pandemic. However, the vision is far from reality. As of 2025, progress is slow. Challenges remain, from countries dragging their feet on tariff reductions to the massive need for infrastructure, the roads, ports, and rail lines to physically connect these markets. But the political will is there, and the wheels are turning. Beyond trade, Africa is also starting to look inward to
finance its own development. This is another crucial piece of the superpower puzzle: financial sovereignty. The continent is not as poor as many think. Its resources are just underused. Africa currently holds over $1.1 trillion in domestic capital, money sitting in national pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and insurance companies. For too long, this money has been invested in low-yield government bonds or sent offshore to be managed in London or New York. Now there is a major push to unlock this capital for African projects. Institutions like the Africa Finance Corporation are finding ways to mobilize these domestic funds to finance the very power plants, data centers, and transport corridors the continent so desperately needs. This represents a paradigm shift from depending on foreign aid to financing its own future. Finally, this growing integration is amplifying Africa's voice on the world stage. The continent is increasingly speaking with one voice, demanding reforms in global finance and a permanent seat at the top tables of power, like the UN Security Council. This diplomatic push, backed by growing economic and demographic weight, is making the world listen. The AfCFTA, mobilizing domestic capital, and a unified global voice are the institutional pillars on which a potential superpower can be built. They are the tools for turning raw potential into structured, sustainable power. The blueprint is on the table, the challenge is now building it. So back to our original question, is Africa's trillion-dollar boom the dawn of a new global superpower? As we've seen, there's no simple answer. The story is a tale of two Africas, locked in a struggle that will define the 21st century. On one side, you have the Africa of undeniable challenges, the crushing weight of over $1 trillion in debt that starves development, the persistent fires of instability, particularly in the Sahel, that threaten to undo progress, and the colossal infrastructure gap that leaves over 600 million people in the dark and puts a brake on growth. These are not small hurdles. They are mountains that must be climbed. But on the other side, there is an Africa of explosive opportunity, an economic engine that's growing faster than almost anywhere else on Earth, with nearly 24 countries hitting growth rates above 5%. A continent that could become a renewable energy superpower, holding 60% of the world's solar potential and the keys to a global green transition. And most importantly, a demographic tidal wave of youth, energy, and ambition, a workforce that will soon represent a quarter of all humanity.
The tension between these two realities is one of the defining stories of our time. Africa's rise is not guaranteed, but it is also no longer a fantasy. Its future will be decided by its ability to navigate this complex reality. Can it overcome its debt? Can it build the institutions for peace? Can it use its own $1 trillion in capital to build its own future? The answers won't come from the outside. The era of Africa as a passive pawn in global games is ending. Its future will be forged by its own hands through ambitious projects like the African Continental Free Trade Area, which aims to create the world's largest single market and unleash the continent's own power. So, will Africa become the next global superpower? Maybe that's the wrong question. The real story might not be whether Africa will join the old club of superpowers. The real story is that Africa, with its unique demographics, its central role in the climate solution, and its growing unity, is on a path to redefine what a superpower even is. Its rise is already reshaping our world. A continent of 1.5 billion people on its way to 2.5 billion simply cannot be ignored. The trillion-dollar boom is real. The human potential is undeniable. The journey will be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, the destination is clear. An Africa that is not just rising, but is ready to lead. If you want to keep exploring the massive economic shifts shaping our world, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let us know in the comments, what do you think is the biggest factor in Africa's future, the opportunities or the challenges? Thanks for watching.